Hello, and welcome to the February edition of the International Leadership Series. Today's focus is immigration reform. It is focusing on a conversation with panelists that we have here. And so we are pleased to present our panelists here. We'll go ahead and introduce them on my end, and then we will go ahead and start in with our questions that we have for today. What we do ask all of our attendees to do is to please remain muted, but there will be time towards the end to answer and ask any questions that we have for you all as well. So, Tricia Cortez is our first panelist. She joined the Rio Grande International Study Center in May 2010, where she serves as the executive director of Laredo's only environmental nonprofit. She is responsible for carrying out its mission to protect and preserve our only source of drinking water, the Rio Grande. Her focus areas are water security and river restoration, sustainable development, habitat protection, grassroots, cultural organizing, and improved quality of life for border residents. A San Antonio native, Tricia graduated from Princeton University with a bachelor's degree in public policy from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs with a minor in Mandarin Chinese. She moved to Laredo in 2001 and worked 7 years as a senior reporter at the Laredo Morning Times. In her spare time, she enjoys yoga, theater, creative writing, and chasing after her two little ones. Our second panelist is Juan Ruiz Jr., who joined the No Border Wall Coalition in 2020, where he serves as a field organizer. He is responsible for engaging with local and regional activists and has worked alongside the Rio Grande International Study Center, attorneys, and organizations across the U.S. Southwest to raise awareness about the border wall in impacted neighborhoods. His focus areas are grassroots, cultural organizing, community and civic engagement. Juan is a TAMU alumnus, having graduated here with a bachelor's degree in multidisciplinary studies. For those of you who's like, what does multidisciplinary studies degree get you? Get you to work on multiple things, which I love. In his spare time, he enjoys gardening and expanding his knowledge of vegan cuisine. Our third panelist is Jessica Cisneros. Born and raised in Laredo, Jessica is the proud daughter of Mexican immigrant farm workers who came to the United States more than 30 years ago in search of the American dream. Her parents' immigration experience and her life growing up on the border inspired her to become an immigration attorney to provide legal assistance like the one provided to her parents many years ago. Jessica transferred her coursework to the University of Texas at Austin after attending TAMU while at the Early College High School here in Laredo. She went on to earn her JD at the University of Texas School of Law, where she was an immigration pro bono scholar and received the Dean's Achievement Award for Most Outstanding Student in the study of immigration law. After working with folks detained at the Hutto, Carnes, and Laredo detention centers in Texas, Jessica created her own 9-month fellowship to participate in the first in the nation public defender model for detained people in immigration proceedings at Brooklyn Defender Services. After a career detour to run for Congress to represent Texas's 28th congressional district, Jessica immediately returned to pushing back against the Trump administration did immigration and human rights work at the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid as a staff attorney. She is now supervising attorney for the Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services Laredo office. A Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, Jessica's dream is to one day establish a universal representation program for people in immigration proceedings and close immigration detention centers for good. All lofty goals, and I am super appreciative of everybody that we have here. So this is our conversation today, is immigration reform. And we're going to start off with Tricia talking to us a little bit about the Rio Grande Independent Study Center, as well as the No Border Wall Coalition. And I think it's going to be a little tag team between her and Juan, but I could be mistaken on that. But we're going to start off with that, and we're going to talk a little bit with Jessica about RAICES, and then delve into some of the questions that we have here together. Sound great?
Okay. Hi, Dr. Hudson, students, and my co-panelist. Good morning still. And it's really great to meet all of y'all, to have this opportunity to talk with you. This was we view this as a crisis for our community, and it's not over, and it's still developing, and I think it's going to be fun to really dive deep into that today. I work with an environmental nonprofit whose focus is the river, which is the border. And so the issue of immigration rights, this was a coming together of these different sectors, if you will, very intersectional, that had not really happened in Laredo before with environmental justice issues. I'm talking about as it relates to the border wall, environmental justice issues, immigration issues, and equal rights. Because the past administration, just sort of the solution to immigration was a wall. And, there's so much to say about that, but let me just quickly go through this PowerPoint. We viewed this as nothing less than the soul for Laredo because of how destructive this was going to be and the manner in which they were doing this. So our strategy was always a delay, cancel, and we needed a change in administration. We believed to get to the cancel phase, which is where we are right now, and going through those developments. But our strategy was threefold. We had a legal, very robust, layered legal strategy that was happening. We had a political strategy that was going on, and more importantly, and more fun, I would argue, and was the grassroots organizing part of it. Our coalition, it bombed on the first time around. We weren't able to get it together. It was a good learning experience. And we came back having learned lessons. And this coalition ended up being a very diverse group across political spectrums, socioeconomic spectrums, and it included everything from big landowners to veterans, educators, artists, people who've never been politically engaged before, finding a voice. So why or who are we to have gotten involved? We're an environmental nonprofit, like Dr. Hudson said, 27 years old, based in Laredo. We advocate on behalf of the river and the environment. And just a little bit about the river, a refresher for everybody. It is an international basin, transboundary basin, this little green ribbon of life that exists in a pretty dry part of the world. So where does it start? So I hope y'all remember your geography here. So it starts in the southern Rockies of Colorado, and you'll see once it hits El Paso Juarez, it becomes an international border. So I always try to, do you see if you can remember this, what percentage of our drinking water comes from that river? Well, it's 100%, every single drop. So the more alarming part, because you cannot talk about Laredo or South Texas without talking about the river, because it's our only source of drinking water. And unfortunately, it still ranks as one of the 10 most endangered rivers on the planet. It's a highly distressed river system. And the number one reason for that is there's not enough water to meet demand. So we got involved 2 years ago. Immediately after President Trump declared a national emergency on the border, we woke up one day and we're told that somehow this place where we live is dangerous and a threat to the United States. And so we formed with a group of people right away to try to figure out, what does this mean? We did not know what this meant. And really what this meant, it was a tool to siphon off billions of dollars from the military and military bases to build this very political project. So what did that mean for Laredo? The wall was about big money, and it was about destruction on many levels and many fronts. For our sector, which is Webb and Zapata, the administration awarded 4 contracts totaling more than $1 billion to destroy 71 miles of riverfront in Webb and Zapata. And so we understood how profound this would be for our community. The changes were going to be extreme and really profound. There was going to be major cultural loss. The 30-foot wall, it's more than twice the height of the Berlin Wall. And it's not just the wall. What the plans called for is it called for taking out almost 200 feet off the riverbank. That's more than a 4-lane highway, and putting in a new security enforcement zone that would be owned by the federal government. You'd have major transfer title of land, off limits, security towers, high surveillance towers, high intensity floodlights, and then you'd get your 30-foot steel wall. And so this is what homes and neighborhoods were going to feel and look like with this wall. It was going to imprison us from accessing something that, you know, we've always taken for granted, and that's a part of our community. And the reason why Laredo was founded in 1755, before the United States was founded. And so the path of destruction was just going to be tremendous. Homes, ranches, neighborhoods, nature trails, parks, the orphanage in South Laredo, Laredo College, you name it. So we knew the ecological loss would be extraordinary and tremendous, and these young people and their kids would not have any of this. And you know, and so we were like, why is this the answer to immigration, right? There ain't no invasion. So we looked at the data from 1960 to date, and Laredo's the orange line, the southern border is the blue line. You'll see there were peaks in the mid 80s, in the late 90s, and you'll see where we were, even at the height in 2018 with the caravans and stuff. Like, there was just not an invasion happening, right? And border communities like Laredo are among the safest cities according to the annual reports from the FBI. And I would say one of the most offensive parts of this, of what they wanted to do, was invoking the 2005 Real ID Act waiver authority. And what that does, that law was passed after 9/11, primarily to deal with terrorism. And it got hijacked by particular political forces. And at the stroke of a pen, the DHS secretary can say, we can waive and suspend dozens and dozens of laws for that community. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the United States. Tribal lands and the border, and that's it. It renders us second-class citizens, and it takes away our equal protections, our rights, our ability to have public input, to have environmental flood assessments. It's crazy. And so I think they didn't count on this galvanizing a movement, and a movement is what happened as a result. And so, you know, we had marches, we did actions, we had sit-ins at the river. You know, COVID threw a major wrench into everything. So we had to get creative with actions that we did. This was the filing of an historic civil rights lawsuit against the Trump administration filed by Zapata County. It's still ongoing and not over yet. You know, we had to reach landowners. Most of the land in Texas along the rivers held privately, and just in our area, it was hundreds and hundreds of landowners in Webb and Zapata. And so we would tell them, don't sign the right of entry, get legal counsel. We did a huge action in front of the federal courthouse on Victoria, painting a mural that said, defund the wall, fund our future. We felt like this was an extraordinary waste and of taxpayer money. 1 mile of wall, $18 million. You know, that's mind-boggling. The amount of money that could fund to meet our real needs is extraordinary. You know, we tried to explain to people, well, what could 1 mile fund? And we did all this research, and these are just some examples. You know, for 1 mile, we could plant 130,000 trees here, etc. So this was our strategy. Bernie was on our side. You'll see him right there with us. And, you know, the fight continues. You know, we're in the middle of this 60-day pause by the Biden administration. You know, we've got an immediate set of asks that we're doing right now, plus the longer term narrative shift of the border that we're after that I'm sure we can talk about later. So thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from our awesome panelists and listening to your comments and questions too.
Thank you so very much. If we want to head over to Juan and speak a little bit about the No Border Wall Coalition.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Hudson, and thank you, Tricia, and Jessica, and everyone else who is here with us today. So I wanted to briefly touch on, kind of the work that I've been doing. So yeah, it's a lot of it has been in tandem with the Rio Grande International Study Center, and a lot of what has been Tricia has already mentioned. I was there, kind of, playing a key role in the creation of the mural and all those actions that you've seen, which I'm sure that is a lot of the work that most people in Laredo and even around the United States are familiar with. But there's also the other side, and Tricia did allude to it, and it's kind of like the outreach that we did last year to border communities or border residents, and not so much just like anyone in general in Laredo, but very specifically and very targeted towards people that are in the direct path of the wall. So unfortunately, the plans for the wall and the alignment were very secretive. So we didn't have, there was no public access to information on the part of the federal government in terms of who was going to be impacted. And there were no, release plans as to where the alignment was actually going to be. So we actually had to go on the ground and actually talk to people to piece together where that alignment would be. And we did this from July through December of last year. And basically it was just a huge canvassing outreach campaign that we took on. We went to people from Mines Road all the way down to Santa Rita, Rio Bravo, El Cenizo, and San Ignacio, which are the most, I guess, the areas that were going to be most directly impacted that had high concentrations of people. And we talked to them and we asked them, how they felt if they had about the wall being built in their neighborhood. And whether they had received right of entry documents, or what they call right of entry documents, which are documents that the federal government requested that people sign in order for them to be able to access the land to survey and to actually determine where the alignment would be. And it was very, very interesting to see how we came to realize how disproportionate that process was. For example, some neighborhoods were targeted long before the national declaration, the national emergency declaration was issued. And, before anyone was talking about the border wall in Laredo, there were already people in our community that were already facing, the fight. And unfortunately, there were no resources at the time because this happened years ago. And as is always the case with these types of federal projects or large projects, it's always the most marginalized and the people that don't have access to resources that were targeted first. And then once those people were kind of forced to sign, then it was larger landowners that have millions of dollars that they can throw into this fight that were targeted. But once they were kind of later on, first they kind of went for those low-hanging fruit, got them to sign, and then dealt with the people that they're still actually dealing with that are kind of against the wall. So in this kind of canvassing outreach, again, we talked to people about how they felt, what they knew, and if they did receive these legal documents, we requested to see them, or just so that we can kind of base ourselves on, okay, this person is being impacted, this person is not, and we can kind of piece together what that wall alignment will ultimately look like. We've also offered legal services for the people that were willing to challenge this the border wall construction in court. There were attorneys that were willing to work either pro bono and or at a reduced rate to help people in kind of have a fight for their property. And many times these are small businesses and small and like homesteads that are worth about $30,000 right at the edge of the river where families actually reside. That we offered extended these kinds of services to. So, and those many of those cases are actually still working their way through court, through the judicial system. So there hasn't been any real movement on that. But at least we know for now that those families, because of the rescinding of the national emergency and kind of the moratorium, we know at least for now that they are at least spared from any kind of displacement. Through this process, we also worked with different organizations such as Greenpeace and the Sunrise Movement, Greenpeace USA, that is, to really like create a canvassing and outreach strategy that was, like effective. And, I think I'm really grateful for that because I got to really encounter people and engage with people that I probably would have never been in contact with. And part of this was also built into the delay and cancel strategy that we had worked to establish. So there was the delay and cancel on the political side, which is the mural and all of these other things that you heard about. But then there was also the delay and cancel in court, filing and challenging the border wall construction at every phase, so that it's dragged out. And it proved effective. If at first we were thinking if a court case took place in July and they had an order in August, that would have been delayed by a month. But what we saw actually is, because of all this pressure that was being placed on the court from the political side, in the court, all these challenges that were rising up that were being raised in court, that process was actually extended well past the inauguration of the current administration. And right now we're seeing that the court has actually, most of the cases, they have withdrawn their motion for immediate possession because, they're effectively no longer seeking those kinds of rights, at least at the moment. So, those kind of talking about those court cases that were raised earlier also. So there was the civil rights case that was filed by Zapata County, and basically challenging the waivers that were issued for our region were a violation of the equal protection under the law, because we are Mexican American, therefore we are a protected class. And the previous administration's actions towards us were directly related to animus towards ethnic Mexicans. So that obviously is still working its way through the court. And then there was there were other cases that were challenging the just compensation. So every landowner that was approached for these types of right of entry documents received nothing for their land unless they challenged unless they went to court, at which point they were given $100. And that was what the government determined was the value of their land. So they were challenging that in court. And unfortunately, the federal government, the judges, what was it, in late January 22nd, they ruled that, the government had said its guidelines and its preferred method of how to interact with landowners through the process of condemnation, but that those were not law, and that if the government deemed itself $100 to be appropriate, then $100 are appropriate, because even though they would prefer that, even though Congress prefers that landowners get more or are given more, that's not necessarily what they codified. So, we're still reeling with that. We're still, seeing how that's going to play out moving forward once the 60-day moratorium plays out, and they come out with this new policy and new directive of how they're going to manage the border. So we're kind of interjecting ourselves in that kind of conversation now. The canvassing, the outreach for now has taken a pause, and we're now doing kind of the other side, which is reaching out to congressional offices in DC and their staff to really get a sense of where it is that they're going. And we've already met with all 9 congressional representatives from the border region, from San Diego to Brownsville. And we're also meeting with other congressional offices that play a key role, either in just the Congressional Hispanic Caucus or and anything to do with really the border. So we've met with Representative Roybal Allard's office about she's the chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee for DHS. And we've met with the office of Kathleen Rice, which she's based in Long Island, because she wants to repeal the waiver authority of the DHS. So we've met with them to see kind of like what it is that how it is that we're going to proceed, especially now that the U.S. Citizenship Act has been proposed, and there's some language in there about the border or border security that we are taking a look at. So, that's just kind of like a general, very broad overview of the things that we've been doing this past year, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with y'all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan. Let's turn it over to Jessica. Let's talk a little bit about from the other side, right? The other side of actually working with the immigrants themselves, and look about when we talk about immigration reform, right? There's a political side that we are feeling the effects on here on the border, but then there's the human side of it that we often forget, of those that are coming or trying to come to the United States, et cetera. So Jessica, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you do, the organization that you work with as well?
All right, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Great, so as you mentioned, right now I am in a supervisory role for a brand new Laredo office here on behalf of the RAICES organization, which is the largest Texas-based immigrant advocacy group that we have here. So it's pretty exciting that they're heading down here, and I think part of it is of the momentum that South Texas has seen over the past few years, that we are getting on the radar, and a lot of it is through advocacy that many groups and people and activists are doing to shed light on what's happening along the border. So my main focus with the work that I do right now is filling in a gap. We're a nonprofit organization. We do not charge our clients for the work that we do. So we are able to take on cases for people that just cannot afford an attorney. And unfortunately, with 30% poverty rate that we have in the city, which is probably higher now due to COVID, it's really, I'm really thankful that the organization stepped in so that we can serve that population. So I am a removal defense attorney. So that means that I represent people in immigration court who are detained at the various detention centers. A lot of people don't know this, but here in Laredo, we have 3 immigration detention centers. One of them is the Laredo Processing Center. So if you go to TAMU and you're heading there from the central or south side, you probably pass by one of them. So it's at the intersection of Saunders and Loop 20. I didn't know that when I was going to TAMU. I would pass by it every single day. And there are people that are detained, members of our community that are detained because they were not born in this country, essentially. And I mean, for somebody that has lived here, her entire life, like, that is insane, right? Because I wouldn't have been born here if I had been born 5 minutes south of where I was. And then the other 2 are near El Cenizo. So it's still Laredo, but, heading to El Cenizo. So we have 3 here, which is kind of wild, considering the fact that Laredo is, we're a medium-sized, city, and we already have 3 detention centers. So I, along with other people in our office, represent these people in front of the immigration judges who are not based out of here in Laredo. They're actually in San Antonio. They have jurisdiction over the cases that come out of here, which also lead to a burden on the immigrant community and practitioners, because in non-COVID times, you do have to show up to the immigration court. So that's why we don't have, it's really hard to have do these cases pro bono, which I think is part of the reason why we didn't have an office specifically dedicated to that here in Laredo, because you have to drive to and from San Antonio. So that's like essentially 6 hours on the road to represent somebody in a master calendar hearing that usually takes like 15 minutes. So a lot of people don't know that. And I decided to get into this kind of work because I, as mentioned earlier, I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants who were able to get their permanent residency through policy, a change in policy. It was the 1986 Immigration Reform Act that allowed my parents a chance at their American dream. And, just being born and raised here with the beautiful bicultural area that we have, it seems like everybody has their immigrant story. And I knew my parents were able to benefit from the change in policy because of pro bono attorneys, because they were the ones who took their case and they were able to get their green cards. So that had always been very present, I guess, in my mind as I was growing up and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. In 2012, that's when I decided to become an immigration advocate, and I started doing DACA work. That was when DACA was announced, and I was through the supervision of attorneys, and helping at DACA clinics trying to get people a deferred status. And those were very, very exciting times. That was when immigration reform seemed to be on the horizon. But then once I go to law school, that's when around the same time that Donald Trump was elected. And a lot of the changes that happened over those 4 years were just incredible. It was literally like a 180 for many people in the immigrant community, where communities were being attacked, and again for the reason that they are non-citizens and they did not have the luck, I guess, to be born in this country. And during law school, that's when I thought I wanted to be an immigration attorney who was working on the benefit side, like folks that get married and like somebody, is petitioning for a family member, and we're, trying to get permanent resident status through that side. That kind of thing is what I also envisioned an immigration attorney did. But when I was in law school, I was actually introduced into removal defense work. And I realized, we have these detention centers hidden in cities and towns. A lot of them are in rural Texas, for the reason being that these private prison companies specifically look for towns that don't have a big job market, so that the towns and the cities become dependent on the detention centers and advocate for them to stay here. So it's no surprise, given the poverty rate that we have here in the city, that we have 3 of those, right? They specifically planned them here. So I got to work a lot with families that were detained. That's when I realized I couldn't do children's work because it's a very unique heartbreak, kind of hearing from children exactly what they went through and why they decided oftentimes to make their own way to the United States. And many times it's because, although it's very, very dangerous, the dangers back home are even bigger. Over there, it's kind of like a certainty that they will be hurt, and they just want a chance at that sliver of hope that they will find safety. And it was then that I decided to do removal defense work, and hopefully work myself out of a job one day. I would be more than happy if my job didn't exist, because that means that, again, people wouldn't be punished for not being born in the United States. So I'll leave it at that. I'll keep it short so that we can answer some questions.
So Juan, thank you all very much. It's greatly appreciated to hear the different work that everyone does. I every time, and I know some of the panelists, and my work is also has historically been in immigration. My doctorate is actually working with and for undocumented student activists, and so I researched undocumented student activists in the state of Washington and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Anyway, the story, and I think you're right, we all have our own immigration story that we may have been either infected by or things of that nature. So this is so important, especially as we talk about social justice. We don't often think about immigration reform, especially down here in Laredo, in a social justice lens that intersects with environmental justice, right? And I think oftentimes when we look at this, we often look at from one angle, but I think as we're seeing here from our panelists, that actually intersects in many multiple ways. So I want to make sure that our students, as we, this series is about social justice this year, that we recognize that social justice isn't just about race or ethnicity, that it takes place in multiple fronts. So as we move in here to questions, also feel free to throw some in there, but I have a couple of these here. So first one here, and we can go kind of whatever order we'd like to in answering these. We have about 12 questions that are prepared, but we may get to them or not. But so let's be somewhat mindful of when we have our responses. So I guess now that the Trump administration's gone, life is good, right? Like for immigration reform and for the work that Tricia and Juan are doing, like we're good, right? Like Democrats are in power, life is good. Is that right? Am I wrong? Am I correct? Right? Like, so we'll move, we'll let anyone answer. You all can unmute yourselves now as well.
I can start. It's better. I will say it is better. I think we're seeing again that sense of hope that I saw back in 2012 again. Immigration reform might possibly be on the horizon once more. But there's still a lot of work to do. And I think that I'm the kind of believer that if you are in court, that's not a great position to be in already. And I think part of it is because the current system that we have, whether it be to pass a bill, whether it be to win a case in court, is set up for underserved, underprivileged communities to win. And I think we did see that, for example, with the moratorium, the deportation moratorium that the Trump administration, that the Biden administration tried to put into effect, and how Texas, the Texas government, the state government, immediately sued and got an injunction. So that an injunction basically just means that it's a temporary pause. You act as if the declaration, the executive order wasn't existing. It doesn't mean that it's illegal or anything like that. All it means is there's a temporary pause. But again, it's like we cannot rely on the courts to deliver our justice. We have to be on the front end. And I think the people that are on this panel can attest to that, that if you're already in court, it's not a great position to be in. So we have to do what we can to be able to kind of steer clear from having to do that last resort and affect that way with policy. And you do that with activism so that it affects the policy, so that it affects the law. Because I'm a firm believer as well that the laws that you have in the books and budgets, budget breakdowns are moral documents, because they kind of tell you what the priorities are for the people in power and the people that are implementing them. So again, I feel hopeful, but when it comes down to me representing my clients, it doesn't seem like there's been a difference in the courtroom as to who's in the administration or not, because so far it hasn't trickled down there yet. But hopefully, I mean, it took 4 years, right, to kind of upend everything. So I'm extending a little grace there, but I do think that there's a lot of work to do. So we have to keep pushing and not, become complacent.
Just to add to that, I think Jessica, kind of summarizes what a lot of us are feeling, cautiously optimistic. And I think we're in a much, much better place. Had there not been a change in administration, this would have been it would have continued to be a steeply uphill battle because of the waivers of laws and just these driving political forces shoving this down our throats. And so I think now, Biden on day one, he had an executive action that called for a 60-day pause. We're in the middle of that. And so the work that we're doing right now is on the immediate front. We want to make sure that the contracts are canceled permanently, that the lawsuits to confiscate the land get dismissed permanently, And then we have to look at what is going to happen with all those billions of dollars that were programmed for this. What happens with that money? And this is where it gets very tricky. What path are we going to go down? Are we going to go down the same path we've been going of viewing the border through a very, very, very narrow lens where the border is thought of just through security, endless threat, crime, illegal this, illegal that, and that's something that we need to change. I think the last 4 years was a very painful experience for the entire border of having your voice literally just yanked away from you and not having a voice or a seat at the table. And that gets to the heart of justice issues. Environmental justice as an example, what does that mean? An environmental injustice means when decisions are made for you or your neighborhood or your community by those that don't live where you do at their benefit, but at your expense, that is an injustice. And so many places along the border went through this. And so it's going to be very important, I think, that we begin the work of demanding and, well, first of all, telling a new story about the border, our own story, but making sure that those decision makers also fund and prioritize us in that way, and looking at border security through just a different lens. And these are, what happens is we're dealing with very systemic, deeply rooted problems. The issue of drug use in the country, our immigration system, what's going on within the countries where migrants are coming from. And the bottom line is the border, we are the front line that just has to deal with the symptoms of these very systemic issues. But I think many people that are part of this coalition believe that there are other ways than what we've been forced to live with, and to look at things more holistically. When we look at border security, how do you tie border security in with ecological security, with trade and commerce, and how do we start to heal the harm in communities that have gone through destruction already, and making sure that in the future their voices are at the table. And we have to rescind those provisions within the Real ID Act. Otherwise, we're going to be here over and over and over again.
Yeah, and just to echo, like you, Tricia, and what Jessica were saying is that, we're in the middle of this 60-day moratorium on border wall construction, but up until right now, the waiver of laws that have been in effect since the beginning of this supposed crisis are still, on the table. There's still rescinding of of all these protections that we are supposed to have access to, and the contracts are still in effect. So we, at the end of this period, we hope to see that those contracts get canceled, but there hasn't been any kind of directive from or signaling from DHS, from the current DHS, as to how they're going to proceed. And we've gotten that kind of sense from the congressional meetings that we've been in. A lot of the people are still under this impression that DHS is still in its formation period, and DHS is still trying to figure out itself as a structure, so it's not really at a place where it can govern. But within a month, because the moratorium ends on March 20th, I believe, they have to come up with an idea of how they're going to move forward. So the work continues to make sure that whatever comes out of that process actually takes into consideration the voices of border communities and the needs of border communities. And it's not all good. The moratorium took place, it went into effect, and just a couple of weeks ago, the Border Patrol is still bringing in materials to the Laredo region, and we did publicize that on our social media. So they were still bringing in bollards, and you can actually go to South Laredo and drive by on the highway and actually see that location of where all those materials are still being built up. So there's still contractors are still proceeding as though at the end of this 60-day period they're going to get the green light to continue construction. And some places are still actually witnessing construction of bollards going into the ground in the Rio Grande Valley. pre-construction or taking place in southern Arizona, where they're still carving their way through mountains to be able to lay those bollards on the ground. So there's still, by the President Biden's proclamation, was something to celebrate on day one, but the honeymoon is over, and they need to really be able to clamp down on these contractors and put forth a policy that actually is mindful of the communities that are being affected.
And Dr. Hudson, so Karen Morales asked a good question. So this is very quickly, Karen. So we meet regularly with the Laredo Sector Chief, Border Patrol, and in the before all of this really, the border wall came, we'd have to meet with them a lot on how they would manage the river in a very, so we could try to find common ground for what they were needing at the river and what we were needing too. And so when the border wall came, we still managed to meet with them regularly, although this was just a huge point we were never going to find common ground on with the wall. We just met yesterday too. So even the local sector chiefs, there's 9 on the entire border, they take direction from DC. And so right now, Mayorkas he was just confirmed a couple weeks ago. They're getting all their staffing in place, and all of the people, the decision makers within that agency that are reviewing all of this, that are going to be creating the policy for this, everything is still in flux and getting built up. And so at the local Border Patrol sector level, they are going to take direction from DC. And they are aware when we have talks with them, when we've had talks, what the concerns are about the wall, other alternatives, other options. But the local offices here, they follow orders, and that's it. That's just how it works. They don't get to make local autonomous decisions at a local level. So a lot is going to depend on Mayorkas and his team on this and the direction they're going with Congress. So the work has to be in working and targeting those decision makers in the agency and in Congress, bottom line, to convey, the wants here of this community.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I do want to share a screen, and hopefully you all can see it. We're gonna, because I think part of what we're trying to do is to understand social justice. And I think, right, when we talk about these conversations, is ensuring that everyone fully understands what it is that the work that Jessica, Juan, and Tricia's organizations are doing, right? It's really about the full empowerment of people to participate fully in the cultural, economic, political, and social life of the country, right? Like that's what we're trying to advocate for across the board. There's this idea of power, right? And so locally, there's not a capacity for border sector chiefs to exercise much power, right? A lot of that, as Tricia was just saying, lies in them following the locus of control with Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, right? And so the power is the ability or official authority to decide what is best for others, right? And I think, sometimes that independent thought that we would hope that our folks in any civil service capacity have the ability to make, right? There's also a little bit, when we talk about this, a little bit more of the immigration reform is really looking at it from privilege side, right? And understanding that, as Jessica said earlier, that those that were born in the United States and those that were here in Laredo are much more privileged than those that were not born here, right? And so, but are seeking to become U.S. citizens or things of that nature, right? And privilege is the unearned access to resources only readily available to some as a result of their advantaged social group membership. By virtue of being a U.S. citizen, born in the United States, by virtue with birthright citizenship, in the 14th Amendment, We have privilege, right? Like my father was an undocumented and is undocumented immigrant, does not have the same privileges that I have, right? And so understanding that I am privileged, right? Not only my color, right? Lighter skin, the fact that I'm a man, right? Like I have all these privileges inherently. How do we use those privileges? The folks here on this panel are using their privilege to work with and for the communities that they're trying to advocate for, whether it's the river, who often, you know, or the families on the living on the river, right, who were only being justly compensated with $100, right, as they had their property that has been in their homes for generations, right, taken away, and Jessica working with them, with the folks there. And the last concept that I think we need to be mindful of is this concept of oppression, right? What we're talking about are systemic levels of oppression that I think Jessica and Tricia and Juan have alluded to throughout, right? You would think just because the Biden administration took over, the Democrats who are, you know, pro people's rights, I would say, pro rights, are, you know, oppressing still to this day in many ways those that have disadvantages in the system. So I just want to be mindful that as we're going through this, we should keep that here. We have a few more minutes left. And so I do want to, if you have questions, folks, I'm going to stop sharing. If you do have questions, I would love for you all to, if you have questions, let us know. But my question is, and hopefully the panelists can stay just a little bit longer, but before we close out, for those that may have class or things of that nature, what is one short, quick way that if they want to take action on immigration reform, like this stuff fires me up, right? Like the work that Tricia's doing, you know, with the Rio Grande International Study Center and the No Border Wall Coalition and with RAICES, is there exactly, Pedro got it right. What can they do, right? Like what can students do? One thing quickly, we're going to start off with Juan, Tricia, and then Jessica.
Well, we're always looking for volunteers at the No Border Wall Coalition. You know, we're in the process of, you know, launching you know, this kind of targeted towards the Congress and targeted towards the national audience to be able to tell the story and to change the perception that people in Washington, D.C. have of the border, and the perception that, again, they share with the majority of the country that have no real understanding and no real context of what border communities are. A lot of people think we are a barren desert. And, you know, I live, you know, 1,000 feet away from the river. And I can tell you it's a very densely populated neighborhood, and the border, you know, has, yes, those deserts, but also has those the cultural centers and hearts, you know, beating heart of America kind of thing. So, you know, we really need to have making people understand that, and we're working with students, you know, already from Rhode Island to kind of engage and to be able to shift that perception. And if students in TAMU would want to participate in that, you know, feel free to reach out to us, you know, because ultimately, you know, it's us. You know, I was a student when I started working with the No Border Wall Coalition, you know, and it's us that are going to be the real driving factor to make sure that our elected officials are able to see us as who we are and not how they've been conditioned to see us.
Yeah, I think bottom line is get involved. Like this kind of work, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And sometimes the work can be very grueling, you know, teeny details. It's not like the big sexy stuff, you know, all the time or right away. And it's comprised of little steps, little steps. Sometimes you're, you know, you go forward, you come backward, but volunteers are needed with so many things, helping with social media. Sometimes, you know, we got to go to City Hall, you know, we need comments written when the time is right. We need people to help door knock. We need you know, we need to do that, get on the phone. So getting involved means so many different things. And it's all vital, it's all important, it's all critical. And you know, I think that's the best way to learn. You know, one of the things that's going to be very important as we start to shift the narrative is to have young people help lead the charge. So if that's, calling a meeting or forming a group, or trying to get a trainer for you to teach you more about organizing, that's a way we would like to help too. And so, because organizing, it requires different steps and different skills, and you're not born with those skills, right? You acquire them because somebody teaches you and trains you, and you learn. And so you can either learn as a volunteer, or if you're motivated enough to have a group that wants to get involved and wants to get trained up, let us know.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that you can do right now is realize how much power you have. And just because you're in your late teens or in your early 20s or in your 20s in general doesn't mean you can't start doing something right now. I think one of the things that I was struggling with, I'm 27 years old, is that I thought I was too young and inexperienced, but that's not true. Like, I want people to know, especially if you were born and raised in this area, and you've lived here all your life, is that we live under very unique circumstances, and people are so shocked to realize what the way of life here is, and our stories are so special. Like, I don't want any of y'all to think that your life experience is everybody has the same life experience, because they don't. People want to hear from us, and you don't have to wait or try to join somebody's efforts. If you don't want to, you can start your own. Like, that's what you have to kind of push away that imposter syndrome, and don't wait to be the change, but be the change now. Y'all are not future leaders, you are leaders right now. And yeah, if you need support or any other thing to get started, there's so many people in the community that are ready to lend a helping hand, and are just waiting, to see who else is ready to take the lead. So I really hope that there's all of you are determined to, have an impact on policy or be a positive change in the community, because we really need you. So thank y'all so much for attending, and really happy to be here.
Great. Karen had another great question, if I could ask it to the panelists, and then we'll wrap things up here. Is there anything we can do about detention centers? And I, having been in the Pacific Northwest and being close to the Northwest Pacific Detention Center, like, what can we do to stop these locations, right? Like, and maybe this is a question more for Jessica, but.
Yeah, I mean, even talking about it, right? Like, I don't know how many of y'all knew that we had, 3 detention centers. One of them is literally hidden in the middle of the city. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. So talk about that. I know that there's a group, Laredo Immigrant Alliance, who does work here in the community to bring awareness about these issues, specifically detention centers. And I do know that at some point before COVID, it's changed a little bit because of COVID restrictions. They had a great visitation program for people here. So there's sometimes a lot of people that end up at the detention centers here who are not from Laredo, and a lot of times that's done purposely because they want people to be extracted from their community and placed elsewhere to limit, family. It's very cruel to limit family interaction and also access to counsel. So just talking about those things, I think is incredibly important. And yes, it's the Laredo Immigrant Alliance, in case anybody wants to reach out to them. They're on Facebook, I believe.
All right. Well, I know we are at our time. Thank you, Juan, for putting their email in there. I know we're at our time. And so is there any final thing? Immigration reform is so difficult to talk about in just an hour. And it's the work that all 3 of these organizations are doing is super important. And so we just need to be mindful of that. So is there any final things?
I was just going to say, telling your story, like what Jessica was saying, is really important. And whether you write your story, you get it up on video, whether it's a little TikTok segment or a longer piece, tell your story. And I think that's really powerful to do and very important to do, because otherwise others may feel like they're free to do that for us. And so I think the more that happens and to do it creatively, the better. But writing and art are powerful tools to use to create awareness and to shift things as well.
Right, we're just taking care of, thank you very much, Tricia. We're just taking care of some housekeeping. So for students, I would recommend, please copy the link, don't click on it. So copy the link and don't click on it and enter it into your web browser. It should work from there. For running into issues, we'll go ahead and I have the capacity to look here at your the chat afterwards. So just put in your Dusty email so we can get you the credit that you need if you're not able to get the link there. I do want to thank our panelists here. If you do have more information, we will also be going ahead and sending out a post event survey that will also get us to the contact information for all of the 3 organizations represented here, right? So contact information, but the information related to the nonprofit. So if you have any final questions, please feel free to just copy and paste the link itself so you don't click on it, hold and copy it. So to highlight it with the mouse, and then it's acting up, so we will let our vendor know, but just to do it that way. But thank you so very much for our folks, our panelists. I know that you're super busy, and so thank you so very much. And from the bottom of my heart and from our hearts here at TAMU, thank you very much for coming in here and being a part of this. We're super blessed to have wonderful rock stars like you all here in the community. I am blown away by the folks that we have here. It is just phenomenal. And yes, let's give them a virtual round of applause for all of their works, right? So it's like, they're great. They're great folks. My hope is that you all take action, right? You take action, right? I think that's the entire point here. You don't have to be in a position such as these folks in leadership positions. You can do things yourselves. Thank you all for coming to the February installment. The March installment, we will be featuring a Puerto Rican Chinese individual from New York who will be talking about women's rights. And her speech will be She Who Walks with Wolves. And so it's about women's empowerment as we celebrate Women's History Month. And so if you have any questions about the series, please feel free to contact us. But thank you very much, panelists. Thank you so very much.